living in a fast expanding world of technology and billions of unique bodies and minds, we need to think about technology, accessibility, design. And to do that, here with us today is Dylan Fox, the Director of Operations at XR Access. We each have our own level of vision, hearing, mobility, and on. So when making VR or AR experiences, we need to think about that. This is my conversation with Dylan Fox. Okay, so we're going to talk about accessibility design for technology today, in particular for VR and AR, because that is what you do. But before we get to talking about how to design these experiences, these technologies for people with, kind of vision or hearing or mobility issues or whatever, first of all, we are all humans. So we're designing these things for human beings. You know, if you designed a virtual reality experience for a bird or a snake or something, it would be a completely different deal. So we have a lot in common. We all have kind of limitations. There's ways that we experience and move through and interact with this world. So this is like a huge question I'm kind of just starting with, but like, what are some general principles, things that we can do to better design these experiences or the hardware or whatever to make it an overall more comfortable and natural feeling experience for human beings in general?
Sure. So I think that the single most fundamental thing you have to remember when you're designing for accessibility is the principle of modularity, right? And this is the idea that we all have different capabilities. And so it's very important to be able to have different types of input and different types of output that people can customize to suit their own capabilities. Because even though we are all humans, right? You may say that most humans have two eyes, most humans have two arms, most humans have two legs, but not all humans, right? Most humans can wave their arms above their head, but not all humans. And so there's an incredible amount of variability within what we kind of qualify as human. And so I think it's very important to make sure that your applications are flexible and that they can accommodate people with different body types, with different capabilities in terms of vision, in terms of hearing, in terms of motor control. They can accommodate people that think differently, that are neurodiverse, right? You want to have your application never be gated behind a single type of ability that you need to access it. Like if I had to pick one thing, it would be that.
Right, because if you have someone who hasn't thought about this and they're making these VR AR experiences, they might just assume everyone has two functional hands. Everyone can see, everyone can hear, everyone thinks in the way that they think, and we all have our own kind of unique kind of body and mind, right? And the more you can kind of make the experiences more kind of flexible, so that each person can have a positive experience in it, kind of the better.
Exactly. And the other really fundamental thing about accessibility is nothing about us without us, right? Talk to people that have disabilities. Talk to people that think or act differently than you do, and make them a part of your team, right? If you have disabled people on your team, you are 90% less likely to ship something with issues that at least, the very least, that person would block them from using it, right? You really want to bring in a variety of disabled folks as early in the process as you can. If they're not on your team, then you should be, doing user research and play testing and prototyping, and bringing those folks to be a part of the process. And if you do that, I guarantee you it's not going to just make your applications better for them. It's going to make it better for everyone, because 99% of the time, something that is a complete blocker for somebody with a disability is still, an annoyance or a point of friction for people that are able-bodied. And so by designing for the extremes, you benefit the means.
Yeah. And I guess we've learned over time by building different technologies. We had the smartphone and we had TVs. We had all kinds of things like that. How has this accessibility design and the way people think about it kind of changed from say the smartphone until now? Because it seems like what you guys are doing at XR Access is you're trying to kind of get it from the start. Let's get this technology more accessible from the beginning, not wait till iPhone 15 or whatever. So, what are your thoughts on the phone, the smartphone, and accessibility, and has that gotten better? And how does I guess part two of that would be is how is XR an improvement on that, or is it?
So I think you've identified something that we like to call the accessibility gap, right? And that is the time between a technology being introduced and it becoming accessible. And thankfully, that is something that we've seen shrinking over the years, right? It took decades for television to get captions, right? It took years for phones to get things like screen readers baked in. We're hoping it will take less time than that for XR as this kind of next emerging technology, right? Because the longer that accessibility gap persists, the more you get this vicious cycle where people, disabled people don't use the technology because it's not accessible. And then because it's not accessible, disabled people aren't seen as a potential market or as probable users. And so it gets, even less accessible. They're just kind of left out of the equation. And so the more we can have XR be accessible from the start, the better a chance we have of making sure that people with disabilities can benefit from this instead of just missing out time and time again until eventually you get something stapled on that maybe lets them use half the functionality, because that's often what we see with a lot of existing websites and smartphone apps. I think there's a lot of interesting comparisons with smartphones because smartphones started out as something that was seen as completely inaccessible, right? There are a lot of blind folks that said, "What? It's just a screen. There's no keyboard. There's nothing like buttons that we can press to operate this. The heck are we ever going to use this?" And yet now we see that smartphones are one of the single most powerful accessibility tools you can use. And part of that is because they come equipped with cameras and microphones, things that let you detect aspects of the world and then make those things in the world accessible, right? There's a lot of apps right now you can use you hold up your smartphone, it reads text around you, and then it tells you what it says. And that is something that blind people, for example, have asked for ages and ages and ages. There's so little Braille out in the world, and even when there is, it's very difficult to actually find or to know that you should be looking for Braille at all. And so being able to use the sensors that are in these devices lets you make the world itself more accessible. And I think with XR, we're going to see that taken up to the next level, right? Because XR, and in particular augmented reality, is all about giving your device an understanding of the world around you and letting it use that in order to provide you with information and augmentations, right? And so being able to have a device that isn't just, a phone that you're kind of awkwardly waving around, at particular times when you're scanning for something is already there, but to have it constantly there and kind of processing, this is what's around you. Let me kind of smartly take the information that's most salient and present it to you in sound or in haptics or whatever format you need, I think is going to be an incredibly powerful tool. But that's only if we think about it, only if we design for that, right? It's not something that happens automatically. I think we've seen that with a lot of the accessibility options that are shipping with some of these devices. It's sorry to say it, but there's a lot of accessibility features that are commonplace in smartphones that just kind of got completely ignored when we were shipping headsets, right? Things like being able to turn on captions, things like screen readers. There's nothing stopping us from building these into XR devices. There's questions about how they should work, but really, most of the devices we've seen so far just haven't shipped with them. They've just gone backwards when it comes to accessibility because the people that are working on these teams, the kind of new technology teams, the XR teams, are not the accessibility people that are working on the kind of established technology teams. So until we see that change, we're seeing a little bit of that with things like the Apple Vision Pro. It in theory, at least, will ship with a lot of accessibility features from iOS, which is really great to see. But it's something that we're still pushing for in a lot of current XR devices. So huge potential to go forward, but also huge potential to backslide is the short story.
Yeah. We think of augmented and virtual reality as actually a lot of people, of course, blind people are going to say, no, that's not how I see the world. But a lot of us sort of see the world, no pun intended, as sort of this visual, highly visual place. And of course, that's unfortunately not, people have low vision or they're blind. That's not going to be the case. But we tend to bias things towards this visual medium. How do you? And so it seems like that's gonna be one part of this accessibility thing. Of course, there's hearing and other things as well, mobility and stuff. You mentioned captions and screen readers. Are there any other things we can do and for VR and AR to help these people who have low vision or are actually blind?
Yeah, there's a ton of things we can do, both taken from kind of the existing 2D accessibility toolkit, but also stuff that's unique to XR. So I think these largely break down into two kind of fields. There's alternatives to vision and enhancements to vision, right? So I'll start with enhancements to vision because I think that's the easier one. We have in 2D rules around color contrast, for example. If you make something with a certain color contrast, I think it's like 3:1 is the baseline, if I remember right, then it is much more legible, right? It's very hard to read something that's like dark blue on black. It's much, much easier to read something that is white on black. And so the very simple thing you can do is to make sure that you have high contrast in your XR experiences. If you have text, try to put it on a background, give it a little gradient or something behind it. If you have key items, make sure those are standing out. Maybe give them a border and a nice bright color or something like that. That will make it much easier to see for everybody, but especially for disabled folks. I think on a similar note, letting people adjust the size of things, letting people adjust the positioning of things. I know I've heard from a number of low vision folks that say, I usually try to bring things in real close to my face to read them. And you often encounter this frustrating scenario in XR of, well, the thing has been programmed to hover exactly 1 meter away from you. And so every time you try to move forward to read it, it just flies back. And so making sure that we are giving people the tools to have an easier time of seeing the things that are already there. And that also includes things like magnification tools, color inversions, lots of things like that. Those can all be implemented in XR to make it easier to see the elements that are there. And then the second half of it for blind and low vision users is text alternatives. And so the basic example of this is alternate text for images, right? So if you are using a screen reader, and for those who don't know, a screen reader is a device that many blind people will use that will read out elements on the screen. If you say have an image does not have any alternate text, then the screen reader will see it and go, yes, this is image JPEG.54379. Great, very useful. If you do have alternate text, it might, instead of saying that, say, yes, this is an image of a golden retriever catching a ball in a sunlit field, right? And that is pretty well established for 2D, for web pages, right? It is not at all established how we do that for 3D objects in virtual and augmented reality. Again, Apple Vision Pro has one potential system to do that in place that's kind of drawing from iOS. But this is something that we've worked on for a while. I know we have some good partners over at Equal Entry who've done some prototyping on this. And it's something that is going to take a lot of trial and error to get right. But ideally, you should be able to step into a room completely blind and have it read out, okay, here's roughly where you are. Here's the points of interest. Here are the things around you. And it's not just exactly a matter of like saying what it is. This is going to be very context dependent, right? If I'm looking for my friends in this crowded social VR mall, that's going to be a very different set of, alternate text I need compared to stepping into an empty scenic vista. So there's alternate text, and then another really big one that's overlooked a lot of the time is audio and haptic feedback. If you were to go step out into a park and close your eyes, you would still be getting this really rich information coming from around you, right? You'd be hearing people walking around, you'd be feel the wind on your face, right? There's all of this information that's being generated in physical space. And oftentimes when people go to recreate those in a virtual space, they just focus on the visual aspects, and they don't bother recreating the audio aspects or the haptic aspects. Right. So for example, in social VR, it's very helpful to have footstep sound effects for people that are moving around, or if not footsteps, at least something, so that you can listen and understand, oh, there's people moving around, there's someone coming towards me, there's someone moving away from me. And you could do all kinds of things around this in terms of, letting somebody know when other people are getting close, or playing different sounds based on whether you're interacting with things, playing a sound when you maybe are walking into a wall so that you know that you need to go around it. But using audio feedback and also haptic feedback, since if you're blind, audio is a very precious resource, being able to also feel objects or feel things when you need to know certain aspects about your environment. These are all really, really powerful tools. I'm doing a project right now that's funded by the National Science Foundation, called Social Sense XR, where we are trying to identify these nonverbal cues that people make in social situations, things like eye contact or nodding, or even just where people are in a room, and convert those into sound and haptics, because people have more than just vision. We have these other senses, and blind people especially are very good at navigating based on those senses, but they need to be getting something to them, right? You can't just have the visual aspects and assume that everybody will be able to navigate around your experience from that.
Yeah, I remember reading somewhere that blind people tend to like things like the rain, for example. They don't want to slip on the ground or nothing, but the audio aspect of the rain, for example, it'll hit the car in a different. You can sort of see the car because it's hitting it with a different sound, and the umbrella has a different sound, and the tree has a different sound, and the dog has a different sound. So when maybe adding things like rain or something, where it kind of colors up the world in an auditory kind of way. Adding things like that in there might be nice. And I might be wrong. Maybe no, we don't like the rain. I don't know who told you that. But yeah, things like that. And then also you're talking about how people with low vision or who are blind navigate through this real world. We can take those same kind of principles. I remember reading way back, there's this article called The Blind Man Who Taught Himself to See, Daniel Kish. And he would use these clicks, these echolocation type things to kind of to see the world, or to locate where objects were. And I guess with XR, maybe we can we don't have to actually do those clicks. We can have those objects making certain sounds, and then the haptics. Yeah, I'm throwing out a bunch of different ideas here, and you just take what you want. And then one more idea I had before I lose it. I just now got it. Like seeing eye dogs, for example. There's that. We have the stick or the cane or whatever that has the sound this making, and also the haptics. You could feel things. That helps. We can bring that in, but also this seeing eye dogs. What if we can bring in some kind of weird AI seeing eye dog, and it's kind of haptically, you can feel it. It's pulling you around, and you can hear it, and it brings you through the world. It's almost like an AI assistant or something like that. I threw out a billion things there, just some ideas. But if you have any thoughts from any of that.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I think these are all things that are being actively researched right now. I know for me, at my master's program, my thesis project was on exactly what you're talking about. Echolocation. How do you identify where objects are, and then give people that audio feedback that there's something there? And it turns out that is a really nuanced challenge, right? Because things like if you suddenly send out sound and get back just this constant beeping from everywhere because hey, there's three walls on three sides of you. Well, maybe constantly blaring in my ears to let me know there's walls on three sides of me isn't the best solution, right?
And they're also more sensitive to sound too, right? If you can't see, your hearing's going to be better, so that might be even more overwhelming.
Not necessarily.
No?
It's actually,
Okay.
I think, a common misconception.
Okay.
You don't get better hearing, but you do become a lot more basically in tune with your hearing. People who
Okay.
are blind tend to have some of that kind of mental capacity devoted to audio processing,
Hmm.
which is why a lot of people will get, who use screen readers will be able to listen to them incredibly fast because they've trained their brain to be able to do that.
Okay.
But yeah, I think there's, I was just about to talk about, it's like a group called Benvision that I think in honor of somebody who was able to cultivate that same type of echolocation you talked about, um, is working on that type of project. In terms of guides, we have research going on at Cornell. You can actually see some of this at xraccess.org/research, where we've been working on VR guides. If you're blind, you may have the experience of following a sighted guide. You put your hand on their elbow usually, and they kind of help guide you around and relate important pieces of visual information. It's a very big question of how do we implement that in virtual reality, both with human guides as well as with AI guides. Um, Both in terms of how do they tell what's important and how does that look? Is it we had apparently a number of folks in the research project independently say, it'd be great if I had like a parrot on my shoulder that could be providing me this information. So that could be one possible approach. But I think the the takeaway I would give from this is that if you're interested in this type of thing, oftentimes there is a ton of really fascinating research that is happening right now, by very smart people that are spending a lot of time and resources to try to experiment with this very thing. And one of the big challenges that XR Access is trying to solve is the challenge of knowledge transfer. Because there's often so much very good knowledge that is out there in the form of research papers, that unfortunately the people in industry or the people in the consumer world never hear about and never act on. And so one of the things that we try to do is to take those types of research projects and shed light on them, right? We hold seminars. We have a bunch of really good ones of those on our YouTube channel. We have a Slack channel or a Slack network where people can join and talk about their research and get feedback. And we try to do our best to take the most salient aspects of these research projects and kind of put them out into the world and connect them to the people that need to hear them. Because I think when you work on a project like this of trying to make emerging technology accessible, what you realize is that it requires a really interdisciplinary approach, and it requires you to really bring together a lot of people that might not otherwise be in contact, right? We have to reach out to platform owners, content creators, researchers, government regulators, obviously disabled people. We have a pretty big disabled community that we try to solicit feedback from on all of this. But there's just so many people that need to come together and oftentimes need to get that additional context, if we're ever going to bridge those gaps and solve some of these accessibility problems. So I think that's a big part of what we do, and one of the reasons it's such an interesting spot to be in right now.
Yeah, and it's kind of cool to have, someone who's, or a group of people who are bridging this gap between academia and the consumer world and technology and all these different worlds that don't always communicate with each other. For example, there's tons of research all the time going on, and it just gets lost in the library or whatever. You yourself you've read like hundreds and hundreds of these academic papers yourself, and you kind of did something with that. What were some of the biggest trends or insights, or just a few interesting ones, or even one interesting one that you'd like to share? Because I didn't read any of that. I didn't read your synthesis of it, but I'm like, oh, you're like this AI of accessibility and AR. So like, what can we pull from that?
Sure. I mean, it's hard to boil down, right?
Yeah,
I
yeah.
think every single one of those papers usually has something good to say for it.
Yeah, of course.
And I think that's oftentimes what academia is all about, is just keeping up with all of the amazing research that's happening all over the world. That's a full-time job. You could just read papers, do nothing but read papers day and night, and still not keep up with all of them.
I just asked you to give me a summary of 500 papers.
Yeah. I think so. I think one trend that I would point out here is that we often see research that is focused on assistive technology, right? You can read a lot of papers that are, here's how AR can help with phantom limb pain. Here's how it, can help with, um, overcoming your phobias through therapy, right? It's very easy to kind of focus in on these very specific problems and design XR as assistive technology to help people with a given disability. And those are all fabulous, don't get me wrong. But one of the things that I think often gets lost is the research that's required to take all of the existing kind of mainstream applications and make sure that they are usable by everyone to make everything accessible, right? Of those, there's a lot fewer papers of, how do we take, how many things are accessible right now? How do we take these mainstream applications and make them accessible in terms of hearing, vision, motor, et cetera, et cetera. And so I would really call attention to that and say we actually need more research on that kind of baseline accessibility. How do we achieve accessibility for these applications that are not aimed at disabled people? I mean, yeah, I could go on about any number of individual research pieces, but I think that's to me the trend that I saw in reading over the research that I have.
Can you explain that a little bit more? Like, what do you mean by people who are not disabled?
Well, so it's the line between XR as an assistive technology and XR as an accessible technology.
Okay.
Because XR as an assistive technology means, things like what we're just talking about with vision enhancement, right? Let's say you don't have very good vision. Here's something that will access the text around you and turn it into sound for you to understand, right? That is an assistive technology because it is primarily aimed at assisting blind and low vision people, whereas, sighted people wouldn't need that technology.
Right.
The flip side is to make something accessible. And so that is related, but that would be something like we just had Cosmonious High, or Alchemy Labs present their Cosmonious High game that they implemented accessibility tools into. So you can play this game, Cosmonious High, if you are able-bodied. But if you are low vision, you can turn on their low vision accessibility mode, and that will help, put out some audio descriptions of things that are around you, increase contrast. It will take this experience that is created for everybody to enjoy and make it accessible so that blind and low vision people can enjoy it as well.
Okay, great. Yeah. So we talked about vision a little bit. What are some of the challenges for people with low hearing or who are deaf for augmented and virtual reality?
Yeah, I think the very biggest one is the lack of captions in XR. Captions are one of the big ways that deaf and hard of hearing folks will use to kind of access spoken information. And right now, they don't exist in a lot of XR apps. And where they do, there are big challenges around making them legible against the background, understanding, if something comes close to you in the VR experience, do you put the captions behind it so you just can't read it? Do you put it in front of it, but then you can't read it anyway because they're so close to your face? There's issues like that we need to work out. And I think there's also challenges around sign language in XR. There's a lot of nuance to sign language. It's not something you can very easily just like have an AI translate. And even with today's kind of, modern controllers, there's somebody once told me that signing in VR is like signing with mittens on, right? You only have these very like big movements of the hands that are recognized. And so being able to have a little bit more nuance in that would be fantastic. So I think there's those. And then the last one I would put as the big one for deaf and hard of hearing folks is oftentimes people use audio cues to try to direct your attention somewhere. Like you'll hear a sound behind you and you're expected to turn around. Just making sure that those aren't purely audio, making sure that we also have visual elements to those to point you, or like have lights come on behind you or something to indicate that you should be looking in a certain direction is something a lot of VR developers have not yet implemented. So it goes back to that modularity, right? If the goal is to get somebody to turn around, you should be able to do that for both people that are deaf and people that are blind. So whatever cue you're using to do that should have multiple modular elements of vision and of hearing, and ideally of haptics as well, in order to encourage that behavior.
Yeah, I think this is all of this stuff is especially exciting when you talk about like social XR, because this, if we get it right, this gives people who are blind or deaf or whatever a way to actually perfectly well socialize with people in XR, for example. Like if somehow we get these hand movements right, the sign language right, the person with I just had this idea who has who can't hear, for example, they can turn it on so all the avatars around them are automatically signing to them or whatever. But that person the person actually talking doesn't even know that they're doing sign language or something, for example.
Yeah, I mean, captions are the big one for that. But
yeah, captions are already there, or how's the caption going?
In a lot of cases, no. AltSpace VR briefly had a captions tool, but I think they ended up taking that offline, and then AltSpace went offline.
Yeah.
But there's a few groups that are experimenting with it, and there's actually a movie called, I believe, We Met in VR, that covers in part a whole group of deaf people who learn to, sign, or at least do kind of this approximate version of sign based on the limitations of the controllers.
Yeah.
They learn to sign in VR, and there's this thriving community of sign language users in VR chat. So I think that's on HBO if you want to check it out. We Met in VR.
How adaptable people can be. They create a language out of like 20 movements or something.
Right. Well, because sign language is one of those things where you can do it over video, but VR with like 6 degrees of freedom is it's this kind of revolution for deaf social VR social hangouts, right? Be able to actually sign to people online with this like full body avatar was really wild, and there's a lot of deaf communities that are paying attention to that. Yeah. But if you don't have any type of captions for almost anything else, it can make it really hard to use in other situations. Yeah.
And then there's this mobility issue, right? Some people, they just cannot move at all, or they can't move a hand, or there's different the neck, or all kinds of things. What are some of the challenges there? I'm sorry, I'm just kind of listing off what about this, what about that, but I don't know. I want to kind of get the summary too. What about mobility and movement?
Yeah. I mean, I'm happy to give an overview, and I'll say as well that we have a lot of resources on this on our website. If you go to bit.ly/xraccess-github with capital G, capital H, you'll find our XR accessibility project that we did with the XR Association, where we tried to come up with, find all the ways that people have solved some of these problems and bring them together into one kind of resource page. So definitely check that out. But to answer the question, when it comes to mobility, I think it's, again, being flexible with what inputs people need to provide. Right? Don't have anything that requires solely on fine motor. Don't have anything that requires people to run across the stage, right? For people that are in wheelchairs, for example, it can be really hard to turn their whole body to face left, right, or behind them. So make sure you include something like snap turning, where you just hit the analog stick and it kind of rotates your camera. There's a great tool called Walk-in VR, or actually the Walk-in VR driver, that does a lot of things around that, where it can take small movements and magnify them into big movements, or big movements and magnify them into small movements, or let people kind of emulate being standing up or sitting down. But this is a really good case of the kind of accommodating for the extremes benefiting the means, because think about somebody trying to use your VR headset on an airplane, right? If you're seated in an airplane, you're not going to have a lot of motion available to you, right? You're not going to be able to move your arms in big directions. You're not going to be able to suddenly turn around and do something behind you. And so if you design for people that have low mobility, well, low mobility isn't just people that are in a wheelchair. It's also people in airplanes, right? We're all disabled at certain times throughout the day or for certain periods of our lives. And so there's a principle called the curb cut effect that basically sums this exact thing up, right? Curb cuts being those divots that go from the sidewalk to the street, the little ramps. Those are made for people with wheelchairs, but they benefit people with baby strollers. They benefit people on skateboards, et cetera, et cetera. When you design for people with disabilities, you make it better for everybody. And that holds just as true for kind of mobility tools as it does for anything else.
Yeah, I live in Japan, and Japan is sort of this place a bit, I mean, at least the big cities are designed because it has such an elderly population. I think part of the reason why it's so easy to navigate around here, the streets and the way that, I don't know, escalators and elevators and all this stuff, there's a lot of accessibility stuff here more than, say, the average country. Still not good enough, but it makes it a really easy place to navigate around as a sort of able-bodied person as well. So all the stuff you're saying, I guess we can use the same principles to design the actual world that we're in, the actual environment.
Absolutely. Now, and we can learn from kind of accessible architecture and things when it comes to designing for XR as well, for sure.
Yeah.
It goes both ways.
There's also people who think I'm a perfectly normal person, but we all have our own little thing that, our own little, I want to call it, maybe it's a disability or it's whatever you want to call it. We have our own little thing. For me, for example, I'm quite sensitive to light. Sometimes I find things to be too bright or distracted by sounds. It sounds like I got ADHD or something. I don't know. But yeah, like sounds can be distracting. Lights are extra bright. I want VR and AR to be able to be more kind of to be able to adjust the environment to kind of change those little things, but which aren't that little. But that would also make a more positive experience, I think, for a lot of people. Is there work being done on that kind of thing as well? Is that something you think about?
That's I think very much a part of this, right? Is that everybody? I mean, hell, if you intend to grow old, then that means you probably intend to become disabled at some point in your life, right? We all have things that we need that's going to make it a better experience for us, and oftentimes when, again, yeah, you design for, for vision, for example, you design for people that are sensitive to seizures. Having big flashing lights could be a huge concern. And so if you design around that, then yeah, for folks like yourselves that may not experience a seizure but still find bright flashing lights uncomfortable, you're going to improve it. I also want to call it, we haven't talked a lot about neurodiversity, but I think that's very much a thing we need to design for as well.
I think we're kind of bridging into that with this kind of topic as well.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah, and so making sure that VR is a little scary in some ways, because when we're using a screen, a PC, or we're using a phone, if we see something on there we really don't like or is going to trigger bad reactions, we can look away, right? In VR, you can't. In VR, you have this big thing strapped to your head, and that puts a lot of responsibility on the form of VR creators to make sure that you're being cautious with that you're not risking people's health or discomfort, that you give people things like a panic button, or you have content warnings that tell people up front, like, hey, by the way, this experience has XYZ. If this is going to be bad for you, then maybe don't do this experience. We need to be cautious of things like that. And it, again, including those by considering people that aren't just like, the able-bodied alpha male or whatever, you really do make your experience not even you really do make your experience better for everybody.
Yeah, this is a bit of a different topic, but are there any ways to use VR or AR to actually enhance people's vision or enhance people's hearing? I know this isn't a medical tool, and we're kind of going in a little different direction here, but it seems like there might be ways to use these technologies as ways to, you might say these are conditions you can never fix it. There's no improvement, but it seems like we might be able to, give ourselves a little bit of a boost somehow by using these technologies to maybe enhance our vision or help our hearing, which we can transfer those kind of upgrades, I guess, back into our ordinary life. I might be too hopeful here, but any ideas with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think when we're talking about augmented reality, that word augmentations,
Yeah.
that's something we've seen a lot in terms of, think of things like night vision, right? Night vision goggles. What is that but augmenting your vision?
Yeah.
And the work I did at Berkeley, the research I did recently was something very similar about that. If you have low vision, for example, low contrast sensitivity or low peripheral vision, we were experimenting with how can we leverage AR to improve that, because these AR devices, we were specifically working with the HoloLens 2. They are equipped to be able to sense the world and then use that information for various purposes. And if they can be used to augment your senses as well, that is going to be valuable for everybody, just in different quantities, right? If you can't see in the dark, this will let you. If you can't see in the day, maybe this will let you as well. But again, we just need to be cognizant of different levels of capability and the ways our technologies can be used to enhance those.
Yeah, if people want to connect with you or learn more about XR Access or any of this stuff, throw out some resources or links for us. I'll put them up in the notes.
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to get in touch with us, so I'm Dylan Fox. I'm the Director of Operations for XR Access, which is a research initiative of Cornell Tech. You can get in touch with us via our website, xraccess.org. And we have a Slack application there that is open to everybody. So if you'd like to chat with us, if you'd like to understand the current research that's going on, just come to the website, xraccess.org. You can follow us on LinkedIn and X. And we're always looking to help, if you are disabled, to help make the technology more useful to you and to also help tell your story and get you representation. And if you're not, just to help show why this stuff matters and why when we make things better for disabled folks, we really do make it better for everyone.
All right. Thank you so much for all of that. It's an exciting new, whole new world. I'm going to have to dig into all this. Yeah, thanks again, and keep in touch.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Michael. Have a good one.